Motion secured. Counselor Thyndarox announced, his words slicing through the gravity-stilled chamber like a chamber seal locking shut. Effective immediately, Terran proximity access is revoked. They are now beyond sanctioned thresholds. The air in the Galactic Tribunal Hall thickened, not from pressure, but from the shift of consequence. Relay columns embedded in the marble began flickering with layered overlays. Orbital markers redlined, trade links struck through in hard amber. Terran channels rerouted to null. The room didn't erupt, it adjusted, silently, confidently. Darox didn't sit. He wanted the posture of dominance to linger, wanted his black-sigilled robes to carry the weight of closure as he stepped down from the adjudication dais. Behind him, the plasma strand banners of the Galactic Council receded into a translucent glow, each node dimming in symbolic succession until Earth's icon blinked, then vanished. "Mark it for record," he said to no one in particular. The scribe drones would archive it whether he spoke or not. Still, authority preferred its echo. Counselor Vesk Talvin exhaled quietly, the closest thing this chamber allowed to satisfaction. He leaned toward Darox without standing. "This closes it. The parasites had their chance. Let them trade with themselves," Darox replied, low and clipped. "They'll learn their orbit isn't a kingdom." The chamber's central display began rotating through enforcement protocols. Planetary approach gates dissolved in the index. Lagrange access scrubbed. Transit verification hubs lit up in cold yellow, denial cascading outward from Earth's coordinates. On the Council's circular tier, each species representative watched the unspooling quietly. No protests, no hesitation. Even the cautious remained silent. Consensus had momentum now, and Darox was the architect of its tilt. Across from him, Valen Drast, liaison of the economic arm, toggled his panel. Council-registered convoys rerouted. Trade lane junctions have accepted the redirect. Meridian Net reports no resistance to flow shift. Drast's hands moved over the glass-like keys with unconscious speed, his long knuckles flexing against the blue light of the interface. Around him, the ambient lighting cooled, coded environmental response to execution-level policy. Earth's bandwidth collapse registered not as a blockade, but as withdrawal. Darox turned to the side tier. Military oversight, from the lower podium, Commander Urin Skull, keeper of treaty enforcement, lifted his gaze. His voice carried the dispassion of someone used to executing compliance without emotional entanglement. Orbital deterrent platforms have aligned. 3 enforcement satellites repositioned to complete the exclusion hex. Calibrations verified through V-node anchors. No attempted breach from Sol origin vectors. No response, Darox said, eyes narrowing. Still nothing, not even a ping. Skull confirmed. They never understood consequence, Darox said. He moved closer to the projection, now showing Earth's outermost reach as blacked-out grid sectors. They thought their silence bought ambiguity. All it did was reinforce irrelevance. From above, soft mechanical whirring signaled the document seal nodes activating. The tribunal chamber housed no windows, only light-reactive surfaces that translated data into environmental ambiance. Earth's segment of the sector ring slowly dimmed until only a dull red circle remained, marking their expulsion, not with rage, but with irreversibility. Closure documented under Ordinance K-87.9-4-Aleph, a dry voice intoned from the scribe dome. The legal system didn't use personality. Its tone was shaped by statute priority. Darox allowed the silence to settle, not silence of sound but of contest. No voice opposed him. The absence was a form of affirmation. "Begin peripheral audits," he ordered. Every system they touched, communications, diagnostics, transit layers. "I want certainties, not shadows." On the far end, systems analyst Kern Voth cleared his throat, a minor functionary by title, but the kind that made final decisions hold. Earth held partial implementation rights on 3 calibration suites, civilian protocols only non-core access. Darox's brow tilted. Only, they were used to streamline redundancy nodes during the relay collapse 5 cycles ago, Voth explained. Terran engineers applied nested feedback controls, useful then, and now, dormant, static level, registered as open license architecture. Nothing overtly invasive, flag them anyway, Darox said. Every minor root is a lever if they choose to twitch. Unlikely, Talvin added. They won't twitch. They don't know how to pivot without spectacle. Then they'll learn to suffocate in silence. As Durox approached the exit node, the chamber acknowledged his departure. A black-coated beam etched a signature path through the floor, lighting a thread of council authority from his steps alone. No applause, no noise, just an unspoken agreement. Earth was now outside the frame. Before leaving, Durox turned once, gaze sweeping over the chamber's curved edge, where the Terran sector used to shimmer faintly beneath the map overlays. Now it was dark, disconnected. It should have felt like victory. Yet the room subtly, logically designed to echo emotional reinforcement through atmospheric feedback, felt colder than protocol suggested. Compensator temperature is off, Drast said, rubbing his forearms lightly. No, Skull replied, eyes fixed on his HUD. There's a slight echo layer delay from the ring synchronizers. Should autocorrect. Durox paused near the exit node. Earth's final transmission. There wasn't one, came the answer from the far console, and there it was again. Silence, not weak, not defiant, but deliberate. He stepped through the threshold. Back in the outer vestibule, the murmur of relay stations and regional comms filled the air, not loud, but layered. The tribunal had a vacuum of formality. This wing had raw process. Here, decision became deployment. Velt Duran, steward of council logistics, approached carrying a relay cylinder, with the null border glyph freshly imprinted. Its hex frame shimmered with active markings, 6 closed sectors, no transit routes inbound, no diplomatic lanes mapped. It's done, Duran said. Durox took it without ceremony. The cylinder was warm, standard heat emission for sealed orbital orders, but this felt different, not heat, tension, like holding an answer too early. Why didn't they say anything? Duran asked after a pause. Durox didn't look at him, because they had nothing left to say, but somewhere deeper than he intended to admit, a fragment of doubt rooted, not doubt of policy, but of reaction, because nothing was one thing, and Earth had given them exactly that, nothing, only silence that didn't defend, and didn't break. The glyph on the cylinder glowed again, not brighter, just steady, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Why does the drift vector keep duplicating? Jorvan Hal didn't wait for an answer. His hand hovered above the console, fingers twitching as the trajectory overlay redrew itself for the 6th time. This time, splitting mid-frame before coiling into a recursive loop and freezing. The light from the laser plasma display shimmered against his face in pulses, as if the system itself couldn't commit to the idea of motion. The room carried the smell of warmed composite insulation near the conduit rail beginning to overheat. Cold recycled air pushed across his collar, making the back of his neck itch. He tapped the overlay again. The heads-up display stuttered, then it blinked, wiping the section clean. No error message, just absence. He tilted toward his colleague Ralk Fenn, stationed 2 consoles down beneath the Relay 7 comms arch. Drift Ring Delta 9's echo feed is doubling back on itself, Jorvan said. No latency, no timestamp offset. But the data, it's retracing itself like it forgot where it started. Ralk's fingers paused mid-calibration. He shifted toward Jorvan, the dark ridges under his eyes more pronounced than usual. Did you clear previous packet caches? There are no caches, Jorvan replied. The registry logs auto-flushed after the 6th loop. A soft click emitted as a warning tone sounded, subtle enough not to trigger alarms but urgent enough to demand attention. Jorvan dragged a diagnostic band into view. The feed began again, real-time pathing data projected onto the graviton layer. The coordinates for Delta 9's inner approach corridor began curving, then doubled. A second loop coiled out of the path, folding over itself in a clean arc, identical in every metric. Then it happened again. You're seeing this, he said aloud, not as a question. I'm isolating the packet now, Ralk answered, voice lower. If this is just an error, it's not. Jorvan's reply was immediate. There's no correction call from upstream, no crossfeed. It's not misreporting. Across the room the floor vibrated gently, timed with the stabilizer recalibration running beneath the panel lattice. Relay 7 was perched above a minor gravity fault line between neutral corridors, so minor shifts weren't uncommon. But this wasn't typical tremor compensation. The vibration wasn't gradual. It dropped and spiked like a heartbeat misplaced. He checked the system logs. Nothing marked it. Jorvan narrowed his eyes. Run a parallel check on sector nodes 18 through 23. Look for Terran registry tags. Ralk hesitated. That's been sealed. Darox's edict scrubbed Sol origin tags from open mapping. I'm not asking for legal access, Jorvan said, tone flat. I want ghost remnants, anything that predated the null border seal. If Earth left something in the grid, it won't be official. Ralk didn't argue. He turned back to his interface and brought up the hard relay overlay. Beneath the primary network paths, the fallback protocols shimmered into view, dimmer, older, running silent for cycles. There, Ralk pointed. Node 19F. There's an active calibration pulse, low frequency. Is it transmitting? No, it's retaining. Jorvan frowned. Define that. It's reflecting inputs, not relaying them, like a mirror with a selective memory. Before either of them could react, the lights over the heads-up floor dimmed slightly, not a blackout, just a subtle shift in temperature and saturation. The map projections turned 2 shades colder. Jorvan's hands were already at the override. He pinged the master registry, and it answered with a single response: object present, data absent. He blinked. Ralk exhaled sharply. That's not a known return, Jorvan muttered. It isn't, Ralk confirmed. We're looking at a registered node that confirms the existence of an object it can't identify. No shape, no mass, no category. Jorvan stood slowly. He felt the slight give beneath the stabilizer plating under his boots. Not a quake, a withdrawal, like the station was adjusting its position around a weight that wasn't logged. He stepped toward the observation tier, where the direct feed port fed into the starfield shell. What should have been the far edge of drift corridor Delta 9 shimmered, faint, liquid-like distortions across the view. Not motion, compression, he whispered. It's folding space. Correction, Ralk said quietly behind him. It's folding our space. Earth's not violating anything. It's retracting. The floor's stabilizer reset again, this time triggering a soft diagnostic buzz that rippled through the tile pattern beneath their feet. The alert on the console chimed again. Node 23L, registry, anchor missing. Fallback attempt failed. Routing null. Shut down the sync, Jorvan ordered. We can't, Ralk replied. It's not active. It's dormant. Then why is it rewriting active space? No answer. Jorvan returned to his terminal. He ran a static ping through the system, not for navigation, but for structure. The grid returned half a map. The rest glitched, then reappeared, then disappeared again. Don't transmit this upstream yet, he said finally. We need to verify. Verify what? Ralk asked. Jorvan stared at the feed as another point blinked out of the registry without alert. That our maps aren't ours anymore. The door to the relay control deck hissed open, letting in the sterile rush of corridor air and the click of boots. Supervisor Vex Loran entered, eyes scanning the center displays immediately. How, Fen? Update. Jorvan turned slowly. Earth didn't respond to the ban. Yes, we've all seen the silence. They didn't answer because they didn't need to, Jorvan said, voice even. They just walked away from our definitions. Loran's brow furrowed. You're making a claim based on incomplete logs and... No, Ralk cut in, tone unusually sharp. We're not making a claim. We're trying to explain why parts of our registry no longer reference their own coordinates. Loran stepped closer to the primary panel. The drift feed had locked into a static pulse, neither error nor success. It pulsed without context. He watched for several seconds, then nodded once. I'll inform the sector core. Quiet channel. Use technical phrasing only. What do I tell them if they ask for a timestamp? Jorvan looked back at the heads-up panel. Tell them it started when we removed Earth. You're telling me the convoy vanished mid-transit, with no acceleration, no impact signature, and no distress call. Vaskor didn't flinch at the tone from the review tier above. His eyes remained fixed on the laser plasma display behind him, which now looped the final visual sequence from Sector Urix 4, a mining flotilla approaching Drift Band 12. Lights steady, telemetry normal. Then, nothing. No fragmentation, no debris. The last frame dissolved into a blank overlay, marked by a flickering coordinate mismatch warning. He stood in the central operations chamber of Relay Post Solvan Prime, flanked by 2 audit officers and a relay scribe pulling timestamp redundancies that refused to stabilize. Not vanished, Vaskor answered, his voice steady. The system thinks they're still present, just not where we left them. Inspector Genner Vuth, the senior investigator from the Tri-Sector Navigation Bureau, paced along the raised rail behind him. The scent of warm carbon from the panel banks clung to the recycled air, mixing with the sterile tang of circuit board insulation, under stress. "Show me the initial deviation." Vascor gestured, and the feed jumped to the corridor's edge. 12 mining transports, aligned in gravitational slipstream. Then, a ripple, not visual, gravitational. The coordinates fractured, not apart, but across. Each vessel duplicated in frame, as if the registry couldn't decide whether it had tracked the same ship in 2 locations or a single object mirrored over itself. Genner's eyes narrowed. Double echo return. Vascor nodded. Recursive 0 coordinates. Each object traced its own frame, then overrode it with a looped echo. From the edge console, audit specialist Karnek Sul tilted his head. "Mapping duality." "No, mapping contradiction," Vascor replied. The registry tried to stabilize the location, couldn't resolve the index, and looped itself. The data collapsed inward. Karnek's gloved fingers hovered over his interface. "We've seen localized interference before, ion surge, faulty stabilization pings. But those don't generate recursive feedback. That's architectural, which is why I brought it to tribunal escalation," Vascor said without turning. These weren't isolated faults. They were anchored to Terran sublayer protocols, buried under system calibration markers from pre-ban infrastructure. The chamber went still, not silent, still like an argument waiting to be decided by gravity. Genner looked to Karnek. "Run the relay through Council-tagged redundancy alignments. I want the drift vectors in triple cross-check against star lattice signature logs." Karnek worked without comment. The lights dimmed momentarily as the station's routing core redistributed processing load. The panel walls, built from reflective obsidian weave and threaded with nodal lines, pulsed once with blue-white stream indicators. Then the feed glitched. The image of the mining convoy returned, not from archive, but from the real-time viewer. The same frame, the same formation, static, looped. Again, Vascor's brow tightened. "That's not playback. It's echo render," Karnek whispered. "It's feeding itself to avoid contradiction collapse." "Which means," Vascor said slowly, "the registry isn't failing, it's rejecting our interpretation." At that moment, a secondary alert chimed. Not urgent, but absolute. Triangulation node 4, offline status, data retention error frame. Invalid. Jenner stepped down into the command tier. Where was 4C anchored? Outer boundary of Urex's Delta Crescent. Direct overlay on the same mining route. The inspector narrowed his gaze. And who originally mapped that stretch? Karnek looked up. Terran frame-sync engineers. 8 years prior. A chill settled into the room, not metaphorical, real, driven by the climate regulators, auto-adjusting to the registry's thermal logic index. "The nav core doesn't trust the coordinates," Vascor said quietly. "Because the coordinates belong to a system Earth no longer acknowledges." Genner stood beside him now, eyes tracing the pulsing waveforms beneath the looped image. "This isn't navigation warfare," the inspector murmured. "This is withdrawal of spatial consent." Vascor's fingers tightened against the edge of the console, and it's spreading. Across the upper deck, the peripheral monitors began stuttering. Corridor charts flickered, then realigned, sector lines rotating inward, forming spirals that weren't part of any known geometry. Karnek spoke again, now with a strange steadiness. "They're not hiding the grid, they're reshaping the frame logic behind it." The main console pinged once more. Observation point U9 reports. Object present, visual confirmed, registry label, unresolved. Karnek pulled the feed. A survey drone on the far edge of a neutral band captured a field of spatial distortion, halo-shaped, rotating without axis, casting refracted starlight in disconnected vectors. A null shell, its edges shimmered, folding space without motion, distorting the stars around it into blurred crescents. Vascor tilted forward. "That's what replaced the convoy, or what it became," Karnek offered. No one replied. Then the comms board lit up. A sector-wide ping from Drift Corridor 11E had gone offline. No attack, no environmental alert, just erasure. The message attached was untagged. Not from a ship, not from a station, just a packet lodged in a fallback directory. It contained 3 words: "Do not align." Karnek stepped back from his console. Genner's jaw tightened. Contact relay command. Tell them we're submitting an emergency grid recalibration request. They won't approve it, Vascor said. It means admitting map failure on a council-regulated sector. Genner's voice dropped. They'll approve it when they realize we've lost the ability to agree on where anything is. The lights dimmed again. One by one, registry coordinates across the center display faded, not blinking, not vanishing, but slowly turning gray, as if choosing to opt out of validation. In that moment, Vascor understood. Earth hadn't just withdrawn, it had rewritten the language by which existence was shared, and now the galaxy couldn't agree on what was missing, because its tools to describe absence no longer had consensus. Null zone markers do not replace jurisdiction. Drav Solman snapped. His voice clipped and sharp as he cut off the report streaming across his heads-up display. They aren't a legal boundary. Their absence dressed up as an argument. The master auditor of the Galactic Cartographic Office stood over the relay adjudication slab, light from the recessed floor panes flickering across his boots as the station shifted orientation. His coat dragged slightly from the cold air cycling unevenly through the chamber, adjusted no doubt by infrastructure systems, trying to resolve where the tribunal was actually located. The building hadn't moved, but the registry couldn't agree with itself anymore. Location verification has failed in 6 core corridors, said Valen Tren, junior assessor, tapping commands into his console with urgent rhythm. We can't confirm which frame the station anchor aligns to. All 3 say we're here, but each one defines here's differently. Bring up the anchor array declarations, Solman ordered. His tone had changed, less impatient, more coldly invested. As if sensing that this wasn't a moment to restore order but to watch its unraveling, Valen routed the data upward. The central laser plasma display projected rows of legal bindings across the rotating frame map, grid vector 14N, 15W again, and 14N reappearing 2 milliseconds before the previous record had logged. Syntax loop, Solman muttered. Anchor array can't reconcile its own location. Valen blinked. We're caught in a retroactive frame misalignment. The treaty registrars don't know where the authority originated. Solman's jaw flexed. Because the concept of authority was built on shared location, he turned to the adjudication wall, activated the council-locked interface, and began pulling legal bindings from Earth's registry. Even though the ban had stripped Terran status from active network entries, archive treaties still required acknowledgement under the interspatial consensus doctrine. The screen filled with glyph lines, sections 9.3 through 11.2b, paragraphs that define proximity as legality, definitions no longer applying to anything Earth touched. Solman leaned in, studying the last clause left standing. Jurisdictional enforcement must retain interpretive consensus among all bound signatories, and now, one signatory had removed itself not from the law, but from the system of agreement. He keyed a directive into the override console. Prepare writ realignment request. Use pre-standard terminology. Disable lexical compression. Valen hesitated. That reopens the framework archive. Exactly. Valen looked uneasy but complied. The legal database responded sluggishly, lines of code crawling down the interface as if reluctant to obey. Solman didn't blink. He had spent half his career parsing conflict zones built on semantic battles and treaty loopholes. He had overturned rogue province claims through punctuation audits. He had ended revolts with an asterisk, but none of that mattered if the map refused to be a map. Are we filing a protest? Valen asked quietly. No, we're filing for restoration. I'm reasserting Earth's position, whether they accept it or not. Can they reject a restoration? Solman didn't answer. Instead, he keyed into the anchor verification node and submitted a standardized declaration of reintegration coordinates. The screen blinked red. Error, origin frame invalid, context denied. He tried a backchannel method, used during the drift belt collapse a decade ago to reassign collapsed frame sectors to backup vectors. It had worked then. It should work now. This time the screen returned a single line. Interpretive logic unrecognized. Source abandoned. A cold weight settled in his chest. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. Earth had not denied the law. It had unhooked from the grammar of enforcement. Try subspace registry access, he ordered. Let's see how deep the failure goes. Valen's hands moved, and the heads-up display updated. Registry pulses returned as fragmented glyphs. missing relational syntax. Some responses arrived ahead of the query, others vanished mid-response, cut off as if the words themselves disbanded before completion. One packet blinked red with no ID tag, filed by unknown, non-participatory entity message. Your space is still yours, ours is no longer shared. Valen turned to Solman. That sounds like a diplomatic clause. Solman shook his head. No, that's a structural decoupling. He accessed the regional treaty database. Scrolls of encoded seals fluttered across the plasma slab, each representing a contract, trade, comms, war rights, transit privileges, all bore Earth's sigil, now crossed through. But it wasn't deletion, it was syntax collapse. The Council's interface stuttered, a glyph unthreaded mid-decryption. Another fragment refused to parse. Treaty seals didn't shatter, they dissolved, unanchored not by active breach, but by conceptual erosion. Valen's voice came again, low. They're not violating agreements, they're declaring the architecture irrelevant. Solman nodded, eyes fixed on the last living treaty clause. The glyph blinked once more, then reset to default, no longer identifying a claimant or a domain, just a blank template. I'm issuing a formal spatial doctrine correction, Solman said. Using what anchor? Valen asked. Earth's presence was the counterweight. Solman exhaled. Slow. Then we lie. We mark them as pending. Unknown. We keep their node open. But why? Solman didn't look at him. He looked at the console, where lines of jurisdictional code blinked one by one into uselessness. Because if we admit their location no longer aligns with our rules, he said, then every treaty we've ever enforced collapses with them. A new message surfaced in the relay log. It wasn't flagged. It didn't carry priority. It hadn't even passed through Council infrastructure. Just a passive update from a drift calibration node used to stabilize gravitational flux across neutral sectors. It now listed Earth's former quadrant as designation, non-consensual space cause, interpretive collapse status. Outside frame Valen's voice was thin now. What do we do? Solman didn't answer, because any answer he gave would have required a map to define where he was standing. And for the first time, he wasn't sure it still existed. Cut relay input, ordered analyst Tovan Kier, his voice flat. Lock buffer stream. Archive everything from timestamp 7-9 forward. Nothing leaves the vault until we understand what this is. The chamber sat in half-light, not dimmed by intention, but by relay sync failure cascading through the primary light grid. The heads-up displays flickered along the inner wall, each one catching and looping at the exact moment Earth's doctrine entered the system. No breach, no hack, no override. Just a whisper dropped directly into the core of every listening channel. Kier's team watched the waveform file rest at the top of the access chain. It didn't transmit through traditional routes. It hadn't even originated from within Council infrastructure. The signal had materialized, spatial anchor, undefined, and yet it knew every checksum and registry handshake. He stepped toward the central interface, palm hovering just above the field reader. Begin decryption. Let the frame load in full, visual only, no auditory projection yet. The heads-up panel blinked once, then resolved. A single figure appeared, no context, no insignia, no background, just a man, old, by appearance. Short gray hair, clothing undecorated, shaped for utility, not fashion. His stance didn't carry defiance, nor reverence. It simply existed, unbothered, unmoved. Kier gestured for visual freeze. The technicians obeyed. The room took in the image, silent, waiting. Then he spoke. We acknowledge the Galactic Council's decision. The voice emerged not through the speakers, but through the signal envelope itself, embedded, not layered. It had tone but no distortion, a perfect vocal structure buried directly into the waveform stream, requiring no amplification. Your framework relies on presence as consent, territory as mutual recognition, engagement as a shared currency. You have removed us from that consensus. The second phrase dropped the temperature. The station's environmental controls responded late, unable to align the heat return with spatial positioning. A subtle pressure settled across Kier's shoulders, like air layered too tightly against skin. We are not contesting the terms. We are not resisting the boundaries. We are removing context. The feed did not pause. The man's face did not blink. It held the look of someone explaining how fire had always been hot, and no longer required debate. Presence is no longer consensual. Kier's jaw tightened. He marked that line. On the secondary display, the relay feed lit up with back-channel activity. Nodes across 6 sectors flagged Earth's previous positions as unreferenced space. Anchor coordinates vanished. Nothing detonated. No data was wiped. The grid simply began refusing to validate Earth as an object. Kier leaned forward. Run time fracture on the message. I want to know if this was backdated. One of the techs pulled a result. There's no temporal origin. It appeared across all receivers simultaneously, without packet propagation delay. Kier absorbed that. The man on screen continued, never raising his voice. We are not withdrawing in protest. We are realigning through departure. Our systems no longer require Council-indexed space to function. We have decoupled relevance from visibility. A ping echoed from the far console. 3 deep-field relays returned relay echo anomalies. Not static, not malfunction. The systems now responded to Earth's former map entries with the message. Query returned outside frame. Kier's assistant, Marin Vosk, stepped beside him. That's not a block. That's language removal. The system can't even describe what it used to see. Kier kept watching. The Terran figure blinked once, just once. Do not approach an error. We are not hidden. You remain visible because you still require agreement to locate yourselves. We do not. Another silence. Then a soft tone, embedded in the carrier wave, vibrated through the console rails. The pitch wasn't musical. It wasn't hostile. It was formal. The black frame packet's tail unwrapped, revealing coordinates that rotated inward, spiraling into their own fractional notation. Marin stared. Those aren't positions. Those are contextual offsets. Explain, Kier said, voice low. They're not measuring where Earth is, Marin replied. They're documenting how many assumptions we'd have to discard to find them. Kier turned back to the display. Continue playback. This is not an ultimatum. No damage will follow. No threat has been prepared. You banned us from your network. We accepted, but we do not remain inside your definition. Your sanction applies only to what still believes your structure. The visual darkened, but the speaker's face remained illuminated, lit not by ambient source, but by fixed interface rules embedded in the signal. Your infrastructure will degrade where it depends on our coordinates. Your maps will revert where they once framed us. Your boundaries will echo. A black symbol flared behind the speaker, not a logo, not an emblem, a field marker, no center, just an empty ring with no gravitational math, encoded as a collapsed frame. The Terran seal had become an absence with syntax. This is the doctrine of departure. The feed ended. No logout, no source tag, no follow-up. Kier stepped back. The silence in the room had turned into a functional element now, an acoustic space for disbelief to settle. Marin finally asked, what's the protocol for a doctrine that doesn't threaten, doesn't demand, and doesn't need recognition to exist? Kier stared at the frozen screen. There isn't one. Deploy the forward arc in staggered array. Delay 3 ticks between insertion paths. No overlap. Admiral Vorn Athik didn't lift his eyes from the command lens, the blue tone of the heads-up display warping against the surface of his pupils. The drift corridor in front of them remained static, not motionless, static. A region of cold light and threaded particulate, suspended as if the laws of acceleration had been uncoupled from everything nearby. The fleet obeyed. 6 carriers dropped from synchronized crawl into radial separation. No enemy, no resistance. Just silence, shaped like a decision waiting to be witnessed. We've confirmed map lock on 2 vectors, announced Fleet Navigator Drave Aresk, 1 tier below, his fingers splayed over the guidance rings. But drift trail timestamps show desync with internal logs. It's bleeding time from pre-breach markers. Vorn nodded once. Define bleed ratio. 4 seconds forward, 2.9 reverse. Oscillation widening per pulse. Aresk swallowed. Command timestamps are holding, but visual history is not. Fleet status. 3 vessels have confirmed redundant position reports. Same ship, 2 points. 1 time index. Vorn finally turned, moving to the secondary ops platform. The room vibrated in microbursts, barely enough to feel, but enough to register on the teeth. It wasn't resonance. It was interruption. Something was pulling on the measurement fabric, not with force, but by disagreement. He studied the readouts. Drift shells, curved regions where navigation slipped without consequence, had begun proliferating. Council charts once showed 1 or 2 in disputed sectors. Now the map reflected 11. 2 of them were new. Neither had been placed. They had emerged. All fleet units maintain independent inertial tracking. Disable central time relay. Record drift stamps locally. Ieresk hesitated. That breaks sync, sir. It preserves context. If we try to maintain unity, we'll overwrite identity. On screen, Ship 9 Cantorum rolled across the corridor's midpoint. Its navigation lights pulsed at standard intervals, but the reflections cast forward, not backward. The hull flickered, once midsection, then a repeat of the same motion 7 seconds later, 1 deck higher. The sequence looped, then froze. Ieresk called out, "Low, Cantorum has entered drift echo." Playback confirms non-destructive entry, followed by temporal redundancy. Are they aware? Impossible to confirm. Internal comms from their bridge replay their own messages on a delay. Their captain requested status twice. Same words, same tone, recorded at different times. Vorn exhaled through his nose. No hull breach. No temperature spike. No energy field. They just looped. Across the bridge, several officers moved slower now, not out of fear, but recalibration. The certainty of where and when they stood had begun to blur into where and when the fleet would remember itself to be. Another vessel blinked. Darren-class carrier, Thulvorix, reappeared 0.6 units to its right. No traversal, just transposition. Then it vanished. Vorn activated command line diagnostics. The heads-up console returned a line that had never existed in Council infrastructure, until now. Fleet object exists without current context. No damage, no destruction, just absence without event. Vorn keyed the emergency fallback relay. Command to Council grid control. Sector Theta 9 collapse in effect. Mapping failure confirmed. Fleet assets displaced non-violently. Initiating withdrawal protocol Echo V. The channel didn't cut. It never engaged. The relay refused to route the message to a location. Behind him, Ieresk spoke again, voice tighter now. Fallback nav loop engaged. But the system believes we're already en route to where we began. Circular logic barrier. No, sir. Recursive pathing. The fallback relay loops the exit before entry completes. Time frame doesn't line up to real-time markers. It's creating prediction stutter. Vorn turned toward the tactical readout. The screen no longer pulsed from incoming data. It flickered as if data refused to appear until observed. He stepped closer, the floor slightly colder now, not by system fault, by spatial argument. The corridor resisted belonging to one fixed temperature. Air touched skin differently by location. Then the message arrived. No origin header, no verification string, just a single notation injected into fallback comms. Not through breach, through understanding. You are entering regions we no longer maintain. That was all. No signature, no claim, just a disassociation. Vorn straightened. He motioned for his communications officer. Recalibrate orientation logs using cross-vector positional anchors. I want starline imprints from every known beacon. Beacons aren't visible. He stopped. None? The officer shook his head. They're returning ping, but not light. They're functioning without photonic verification, meaning they existed in math, but not in witness. Vorn stepped toward the viewport. Outside the stars shimmered, then didn't. They reappeared in a grid they didn't align to, adjusted themselves, then disappeared again. They're blinking out of agreement, he muttered. Sir? Ieresk asked. They're not moving. Our ability to agree on where they are has been revised. He issued the recall. No tactical failure, no engagement, just silent deconstruction of navigation itself. As the fleet reversed drift crawl, 2 ships failed to rematerialize. No flare, no debris, just blank entries where logbooks used to be. The system noted their status. Fleet object expunged. Historical index incomplete. Vorn didn't react. He didn't shout. He reached to the console and tapped a private command line. Command entry, Athec Delta 14 summary, Sector Theta 9 incident type, spatial format collapse outcome, irrelevantization of movement notes, They don't deny us. They revoke our ability to be certain we're present. The timestamp failed to append. That was the final sign. They hadn't lost the sector. They'd lost proximity. And with it, the idea that they could ever define where anything truly was. Query Earth dossier. Full lineage. Council interaction chain. Pre-ban registry. Nask Jurin didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. In the core archive, silence did more than keep the system efficient. It mirrored the illusion that records never argued back, until now. The heads-up slab before him pulsed once, then stalled, not a freeze, a recalculation. The glyphs along the data spine blinked in staggered rhythm, hesitating between syntax alignments. Finally, the terminal returned one line. Request failed. Object unsubscribed. Jurin blinked, not at the words, but at the category. Unsubscribed wasn't a denial. It wasn't security-based. It was voluntary removal. The tag didn't reject access. It declared itself no longer available to be accessed. He rerouted through the oldest entry point, an archaic enclave node once used to log early trade with post-isolation Terran enclaves. That log had been sealed beneath 16 verification stamps and 2 syntax vaults. The slab buzzed again. Treaty path invalidated. Parent thread not found. The screen flickered once more. Slowly, almost like a sigh, the council seal at the top of the display was replaced, not by Terran glyphs, but by an empty circle, a ring that wasn't meant to mean anything. Jurin knew better. He'd seen that shape once before, broadcast embedded into drift frame collapse messages across 6 sectors. The ring wasn't a logo. It was a placeholder left behind by something that no longer considered itself located. He activated deeper meta-access layers, scrolls of council engagements with Earth unwrapped in fragmented code, cultural exchange treaty, archive corrupted, orbital defense proposal, citation removed, council membership timeline, loop detected, replaying log #0005. He ran that one. Log #0005 began normally. A voice transcript of an early diplomatic entry from Earth's emissary at the founding vote. Jurin had studied it before. A speech on collaboration. This time the voice had been stripped. Only ambient reverb remained. The syntax blocks played, but the words were blank. He checked the metadata signature. Data present, meaning dereferenced. Jurin stepped away from the terminal. Across the archive tier, 4 auxiliary historians worked in silence, but their displays had begun shifting too. One showing sector transitions that no longer lined up with drift chronology, another projecting system maps that looped into themselves like mirrored documents read backward. Jurin turned toward the central glyph wall, a monument to stabilized treaties, etched into glassstone using encoded reactive light. The glyphs shimmered faintly, responding to shifts in meaning across the council's active lexicon. Most were stable, except one. The symbol representing Earth had dimmed, not removed, not crossed out, dimmed as if the wall itself no longer trusted it. A whisper behind him. Jurin, he turned. Archivist Relin Vor, mid-level doctrinal specialist, stood with his palms still pressed against the corner terminal. They just purged my access. Jurin frowned. Security lockdown. No, Relin shook his head. I requested Terran involvement in the Oryx Water Accords. The response I got wasn't a denial. He showed the message on his console. No reference found. Entry never existed. Jurin stepped closer. That treaty was signed under shared waterway parity conditions. Earth's fleet provided escort compliance. There were 3 co-signers, one still active. I checked those, Relin said. The other signers' entries remain, but each one shows Earth's involvement as a gap. The paragraph structure even rewrites itself to skip the mention entirely. That's not deletion, Jurin muttered. That's auto-sanitization of causality. He moved back to his slab and initiated a full registry crosswalk, comparing all stored Terran entries across sectors, treaties, historical declarations. The slab returned a spiral overlay of fragmentation symbols. Treaties flickered as corrupted, every 4th node replaced by that black ring. In each case, the metadata still existed, but the content referred to nothing. Null index. Object no longer qualified for observation. He loaded the older broadcast packet. Earth's doctrine. Presence is no longer consensual. The phrase now echoed deeper than policy. It had permeated the archive like a memory that refused to validate itself when questioned. Across the archive vault, Technicians whispered as time-coded events began to misalign. Meeting logs placed at one timestamp now referenced treaties from years later. Council charters with Earth's name affixed now listed that space as origin undetermined. Duran ran a retro-validation query on the founding edict. It was the highest protected file in the Council's legal framework. If Earth's name had ever existed there, it would be etched in irrefutable seal. The display loaded. The edict rolled downward. 12 signatories, then 11. Line 12 blinked. The glyph space still existed, but it flickered, repeating itself. It showed Earth's shape, then reset, then nothing, then the ring again. The system error was silent. The edict was still valid. It had just stopped meaning anything. Duran whispered to no one. We didn't lose their trust. We lost their consent to be remembered. He keyed in one final command. Trace Earth's earliest contact. Reconstruct auditory introduction. The playback stuttered. A voice began. This is Earth command. We offer. Then the voice fractured. The phrase ended mid-sentence. The audio folded in, echoing backward, then stopped. The system inserted its own message. Historical reconstruction denied. Object no longer subscribes to linear relevance. Duran stared. The data hadn't been erased. It had been unrooted, cut off from the concept of existing inside shared time. Relin spoke again. What if they didn't just leave the map? Duran didn't look at him. What if they left the memory that we had won? No one answered. The archive lights dimmed one increment, not by system fault, but because the wall could no longer define where in the structure the light source belonged. In that moment, Duran understood. Earth had not destroyed the Council. It had removed the idea that the Council ever had anything to destroy. The final vote was called. The motion to reassert Earth's compliance with Council directives. Councillor Than Derox read it aloud, his voice flat, not with hope but with the echo of habit. He leaned against the console, fingers pressing against the ornate engraved surface of the laser plasma display, as if forcing the words to mean something. He didn't expect any argument. The chamber fell silent, the air so still it almost felt dense. Technicians at their stations had stopped typing. Council members at their platforms were as still as if the room itself held its breath, not in anticipation, but in resignation. In this final session, the idea of Earth's return was nothing but a ritual, an acknowledgement of an authority that had already failed. A single ringed form flickered on the central screen, Earth's black ring glyph glowing faintly under the harsh lights. It had been there since the first sanction, and now it had become a blank space, an anchorless circle, unchallenged and untouchable. The symbols of old alliances began to crumble beneath it, one by one. The vote passed. But the numbers didn't change. They never could. As soon as the motion was accepted, the system didn't acknowledge it. Frame rejected. Ten Morix, a long-standing historian for the Council, stood. The room had forgotten his presence long ago, but his stature in the archives had kept his words relevant, even when history itself was being erased. Now, his voice cut across the stillness. You banned a nation that no longer uses your universe. The transmission was chilling, not because it was aggressive, but because it was factual. His words hung in the air, amplified not by volume but by the weight they carried. The speakers crackled faintly, not from any real distortion, but from the inherent disbelief resonating through the Council's once impenetrable walls. You didn't eliminate them, he continued, his gaze moving across the chamber, not a single soul in that room untouched by the finality of his statement. You made them irrelevant, and in doing so, you've written the final chapter of your own history. The lights flickered above, as if in unison with the disintegration of a shared reality. Councillor Derox's hand trembled slightly as he looked down at the motions tabulated in front of him. Even the most meticulously controlled systems within the station began to fail. The map updated, then unupdated. Layers of data rolled across the display in erratic, unpredictable waves. Update, location lost. The console beeped. The display went black. There was no explosion, no system breach, no crash. The coordinates for Earth's space just refused to register, not invalidated, not erased. They simply didn't exist anymore. The galaxy had no place for Earth, but neither did it have a place to make sense of the absence. Error map data unreachable. Query not available. A palpable weight pressed against the chest of every member of the Council. They felt it not physically but philosophically, the collapsing of their own sense of control. Their systems, built to be perfect, had failed. not through attack, not through sabotage, through rejection. System failure, came a voice from the back. Earth's coordinates have ceased to exist within our framework. The technician hesitated, as if trying to find a word strong enough. They've unmade themselves. Impossible, Counselor Yvonne muttered. He stood, his skeletal frame casting a long shadow across the marble floor. He gestured toward the screen, his hands shaking. We control the narrative, we dictate the terms. And yet, nothing happened. No one responded. There was no backup plan, no more treaty proposals. There was only the absence where a solution should be. The attempts to engage Earth through law, through military might, through diplomacy, had failed because they were built on an assumption that no longer applied. They had assumed that their definitions held power over the very concept of existence. Counselor, we need to suppress the truth, said Ten Morix, his voice quieter now, but resonating deeper than ever before. The galaxy cannot know that we are this irrelevant. Counselor Durox turned his gaze to the master console in front of him. His fingers moved mechanically, tapping the authorization code to suppress the truth. He expected the motion to register, to solidify their last form of power, but the screen stayed blank. The override failed. There was no further action to be taken. The truth of Earth's non-existence within the Council's frame had already been delivered. Map failure, coordinate reallocation unnecessary. The Council's AI chimed in, its voice emotionless, robotic. Query invalid. Cannot reassert status. The room was silent now. The symbols flickered, some disappearing entirely, not just from the screens, but from the air. The chairs remained empty. The voices that had filled the chamber now faded into the backdrop of history. They're not gone, Morix whispered, his tone far from triumphant. It was heavy with understanding. They're beyond us. The final transmission came not from a ship, not from a fleet, but from the infrastructure itself, embedded deep within the systems of Council command. Your frame has been rejected, it said. There is nothing to ban. Counselor Durox straightened, but his face was pale, his hands were still, the motion he had expected now unnecessary. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. We were never in control. No vote, no declaration, no victory, only silence. Earth had not defeated them. Earth had simply ceased to acknowledge their existence. The map had no borders, no starting point. The stars flickered overhead, only this time, they no longer marked positions, they simply existed.